And China are expected to sign an initial trade deal today that would be a first step in ending the long-running dispute between the world's two largest economies. The Phase 1 agreement, as it's called, has not yet been made public, but it's expected to roll back US tariffs on Chinese goods in return for China buying more US crops and products. It's also expected to include more protection for American technology and trade secrets. But many issues remain unresolved with talks on a Phase 2 deal postponed until after the 2020 elections, which will be at the end of the year. For more on this US-China talks, we're now joined by our correspondent in the US, Kate Fisher. She's in Washington. Kate, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. I suppose this agreement is great news for an incumbent president in an election year.
Yes, it certainly does give President Trump an achievement that he can talk about on his campaign rallies, on his part of his stump speech. He was campaigning just last night, and it already was a big factor in his speech at the campaign rally in Toledo, Ohio, where he talked a lot about how he was the only man that could hold China to account. He talked about how in past administrations he had other presidents had failed to do so, and that he was the first one who has had the guts, the courage to stand up to China. So he's really making a big issue of this on the campaign trail, because of course he hasn't had that many of these to talk about. So he's really pleased that he is able to say, and we know from the fact that he's invited, I think, around 200 people to the White House for the signing ceremony, which will take place in an hour or so's time here in Washington. He wants to make a big fanfare of this so that it is seen across the country, he hopes, in news bulletins and on newspaper front pages, so that he has got something tangible to tell voters that he's achieved on their behalf. And even those people that perhaps don't support Donald Trump do perhaps want to see the US take a tougher stance against China, who of course is their biggest economic rival.
Do we have any clues whatsoever as to what's actually in this Phase 1? Because people are going to want to scrutinize, okay, what was the situation before things fell apart between the two countries, and what's on the table now? Because it may be things haven't moved all that much.
Well, that's right. And the thing is, we don't actually yet have the text of this Phase 1, so-called Phase 1 agreement. We have had a few snippets from both sides, or mainly from the American side. The Chinese have kept quite quiet about what's contained within these pages. We understand around 86 pages. The vague ideas we've had, the biggest one is a boost for American farmers who, of course, suffered severely through these tariffs, particularly those who grow soybeans. There are big incentives for them. We're told that the Chinese have promised to buy an extra $40 billion worth of American farm products in the next year or so, which is a huge boost for them. There is concern amongst the farming community, though, as to how this will be policed and whether the Chinese will keep to it. However, they say they really do welcome this if that is the case. We understand as well that the Chinese have pledged to buy more manufactured goods, more energy products and more services, and make some concessions on things like intellectual property, which was a big cause for concern here in the US, and the transfer of technology. So those trade secrets that the Americans have accused Chinese of stealing, and the way that the Chinese say that if the US technology companies want to trade in China, they first of all have to pass over all their technology secrets. Those things have had some softening to appease American companies. However, the really big sticking points that have caused the biggest problems between the two countries, things like the Chinese state subsidies of state-owned enterprises, which the US says make it an unfair playing field for their businesses, that has not been addressed in this agreement. And many analysts suggest that that is the biggest sticking point. And the US President Donald Trump has said he's not even going to look at a Phase 2 deal until after the election in November.
All right, China doesn't like to be bullied, but certainly doesn't want a trade war to continue indefinitely. Does this look like these two superpowers perhaps starting to walk towards each other? I mean, the bulk of the tariffs remain, so it's not as if it's a huge relief, but certainly some relief. But I suppose, importantly, this relationship between these two countries, is this seen to be improving with the signing of this pact?
I certainly think both sides have sighed a sigh of relief at this, that there is at least a pause in the tensions between the two of them and the economic tensions. And certainly for President Trump, key for him was to try to appease the rural voting base. Of course, they supported him in 2016. He needs their support in 2020. So the fact that this phase one deal does offer a large boost for farmers will be important for Donald Trump domestically. But you're right, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, will not want to be seen to be giving in to the US, and in the same way that the President Trump doesn't want to be seen to be giving concessions to the Chinese. But I think this deal gives both leaders some kind of sense of achievement, whilst not forcing them to deal with those big issues that will cause much more problems and headaches for negotiators in the months to come. I think it's really important for both of them that they've had this pause, but as you say, huge amounts of tariffs still remain, which will anger many US companies and, of course, anger Chinese exporters.
All right, cybersecurity, a big issue, and I look at companies like Huawei. Will they be addressed in this phase one deal, or is that another part of the many unresolved issues unlikely to be impacted by this deal?
Well, as I said, there are a few concessions on some of these more technology-related issues. Things like intellectual property law, the idea that the Chinese have been taking US trade secrets, the idea of more robust policing of piracy and counterfeiting, which again, US companies have long complained that the Chinese have been doing. We understand clauses within this agreement to deal with that, and the transfer of technology, US technology firms being forced to reveal their technological secrets before they could trade their products in the Chinese market. There will again be moves to police that further in this deal. But when it comes to those huge companies like Huawei, that will only touch on very small parts of their business. And for American technology companies, particularly, I think this probably won't go far enough. They will want to see more. And for all American companies that want to compete with Chinese state-owned companies, this deal does nothing for them. And they will be desperately campaigning, lobbying for more of this to come in the phase two, should that happen after the election.
All right, so that's American businesses, a lot of them doing exports. But there are a lot of American businesses that are importing Chinese goods and services and passing them on to consumers who want them. And I suppose with the bulk of these tariffs still in play, that means a lot of financial pain for American businesses. Are their voices being heard?
I think they feel that perhaps the farming issue has been overtaken that of other businesses, things like the apparel industry and some tech firms. And I think some analysts are suggesting that although this has perhaps appeased the agricultural sector, at least momentarily, there is still concern that there are many, many other industries where they are still having huge ramifications from these tariffs. It's meaning that they can't hire more people, or they may have to let some go. It means they can't expand their businesses. And they thought that these initial tariffs, when this trade war began, they imagined imagined it would just be a short-term thing. I don't think many of them foresaw it to be over several years, which it looks like it is now going to be. As you say, there doesn't seem to be any sign that these other tariffs, and billions of dollars of them, are about to change. And that means that it makes it very hard for businesses to make plans for the future, to think about expansion, and it also makes it very hard for the markets to have confidence in investing in those businesses when they don't know how long these tariffs are going to stick around for. So yeah, there may be some appeasement amongst the farming sector, and maybe Donald Trump will have won back some votes from those rural communities, but there are many other industries who are still suffering because of these tariffs and may want to see more ahead of the November election.
All right, and perhaps finally, I know it's only happened a short while ago and it's still early in the US there, but these mass resignations of government in Russia and the Prime Minister resigning there, has that even registered in the US at all, or they're still waking up to the news?
I think they're still waking up to that. Look, President Trump is very focused on the signing of this deal in just over an hour's time. He wants it to be a big celebration and fanfare so that he can boast about it, and so he has not been putting attention to anything else at the moment. Also, of course, on Capitol Hill this morning, we have the beginnings of the Democrats passing on those articles of impeachment to the Senate. So I think President Trump's mind is split between the trade deal with China and what's happening to his impeachment process on Capitol Hill.
All right, Kate, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your insights this day. That's our US correspondent in Washington, Kate Fisher, giving us an update, of course, on that Phase 1 trade deal between the US and China that's being signed. It's expected to be signed in not so long from now, we believe, in maybe just under an hour, but we'll keep you updated with that. Let's come back.